Hello everyone, welcome. Thank you all for coming this evening as we celebrate Pride at Scott Logic. This is one of a number of events that we're holding throughout the month to celebrate, so I really appreciate everybody being here. And thank you too for everybody who's joining us on the live stream. It's much appreciated. Glad you could be here. And thank you to all our lovely panellists too. Some have travelled from far away, some are local, but it's great that you could be here. And of course, everyone in the room can enjoy this amazing view that we have behind us. So I hope that the live stream audience is able to pick up some of these incredible Newcastle landmarks that we can see as well. I'm just going to do a quick bit of housekeeping before we get going, and then I will pass you over to your host for the evening. So first and most importantly, the loser through that door there. They're just on your left. Ignore the push button sign, or the door's disabled, so just push the door open and they're just on your left. There is no fire alarm planned for this evening, so if the fire alarm does go, please follow us out of the door. The nearest exit is just there. It's just as you came in. So that's the important stuff out of the way. And finally, how you can join in with this evening's event. We really want everyone to participate, whether you're here in the room or whether you're watching on the live stream. You will see if you're in the room that we have some QR codes around the room. So we're using Slido this evening for the Q&A. So please do zap the Q&A code, get yourself on Slido. Questions for the panel on there. You can raise your hand at the end as well and ask a question. I'll have a microphone at the end of the event and I can come round and pass the microphone to you. And for those dialing in on the live stream, one of my colleagues is going to put the link to Slido into the chat feature there as well. And you can also upvote each other's questions, which will really help us prioritise at the end. So without further ado, let me hand you over to your host for this evening, our CEO, Scott Logic CEO, Steve Foreshew-Cain.
Thank you very much, Claire. Although you've just ruined my intro, I've got written down, tell people you're the CEO. I'm going to have to come up with some other interesting facts. So thank you to everyone. It is a genuine privilege to be able to host an event like this on behalf of Scott Logic and to welcome our incredible panelists along for this evening. I'm not going to talk for long. We want to get into the conversation as quickly as we possibly can. But I did want to kind of set a context about what we're talking about tonight. So we are living in times where our hard-won progressive civil liberties seem ever increasingly at risk, under threat in some way. And so for Pride this year, we thought it would be a really unique opportunity to bring a group together like this to talk about, particularly under the banner of the theme that Northern Pride are actually celebrating under this year, which is along the theme of remember, resist, and rise up. Remember, we've come a long way. We have achieved many progressive steps forward to true equality, inclusion, and a sense of belonging. And I feel that here at Scott Logic every day that I'm at work, but increasingly what we're seeing is some of those things are under threat. We have to resist the urge of some people around us, some areas of our society, of wanting to wind the clock back. And that's on all of us. And then there are yet things we have not yet achieved, not truly full equality. I blogged recently about some of the things that worry me, whether it is discrimination of people who are trying to get a home loan or trying to get a home, whether it is the increase in the statistics around hate crime and what we're seeing in terms of prosecution and actual rates of conviction, as well as, you know, we can't avoid the fact that statistics are telling us that the most disenfranchised within our own community of the LGBT folks, whether that is ethnicity, whether that is social background, whether neurodiversity, or whether people are trans, they actually see even heightened rates of discrimination, and we collectively have to come together to work out what we want to do about that and what we need to do about that. But it's important for me tonight, as the leader of an organization that has embraced me, that has welcomed me, and makes me feel that I can be truly who I am in every day, in every way, in every conversation with every employee. And so we want to, as an organization, continue to create an environment here at Scott Logic that truly lives up to our values of inclusivity, but also think about what can we do outside the walls of this fantastic building that we call home here in Newcastle and across the cities that we represent across the whole of the UK. So that's the context. We're not going to stick too hard and fast to the theme. I think we've got some really interesting questions, and I know there's already been some come through on Slido, so we're going to play it fluid as much as we can. But I would like you to meet some folks who've very generously given their time to come along this evening. So what I'm going to do is, if Laura, Brian, Ali, and Terry, if I could ask you to introduce yourselves in turn, but also maybe just give us a few minutes on why is being here tonight important to you? Who wants to go first?
Well, I'm sat next to you. Hello, everyone in the room and at home. So I'm Laura Crowe. I'm the Head of IT Services at Newcastle Strategic Solutions. I'm here tonight, I think, to celebrate being gay, being married, feeling like that is a statement that you can absolutely say with confidence and in a safe environment. So I think that's really important. I've actually came tonight, I think, to learn. I know my experience as someone as part of the community and as part of my, part of my organisation. I've been there for a long time. I think we do some great stuff. I think there's a lot that we can learn, and this panel has got a lot of their own experience. So that's why I'm here, to share, but to really take away as well. That's what I want.
Brilliant. Well, thanks for coming along. Brian.
Hi, everyone. My name is Brian Renwick. I'm a senior software engineer at Healx. I'm gay. I'm here with my partner, Stephen, tonight as well. Hello, Stephen. And I'm here tonight because, as Laura said, I'm here to learn. I'm also here to share my experiences, and I hope that everything that the panel can share tonight will be beneficial to everyone here and everyone watching online as well. Yeah, that's me.
Brilliant, thanks. Ali.
Hello, my name's Ali Hannon. I'm a equality, diversity and inclusion consultant. I also teach and perform comedy improv, which you might think, what, those two things don't belong together. For me, they do. So my work is centred around creating environments or helping organisations create environments where everybody feels like they belong. I call them cultures of belonging. I like the idea that organisations like yours, which is obviously true, I've met some amazing people already who feel like they belong, is that no matter who walks through the doors, that there's a space for them. And people have the language and understanding to help them get the best out of the environment, but also do their best work, because ultimately that's what we want. And the comedy improv stuff, I like not taking things too seriously. I think there's a lot of earnestness in this kind of activism, and I can be earnest when I need to be, but really I want this to be joyful. I look at that flag, and by the way, I'm looking at the progress flag, and I feel joy. I feel like I want to celebrate. I feel like I want to dance. I feel like I want some glitter. And that, for me, that is what I want to pour into organisations, is that I want people to feel empowered to talk about diversity and inclusion like it's something that they are passionate about rather than something that they're being forced to come to terms with. So that's me in a nutshell.
Thank you. Terry.
Hey, folks. Terry Brown here. So I'm a traditional technologist. I've been a software engineer most of my life, and I non-reluctantly started managing people about 10 to 12 years ago. So, you know, I work at Healx with Brian as well, where we're looking for treatments for rare disease. The part of me tonight that felt it most important to show up was around allyship. I'm trying to be the best ally I can. My son would never forgive me if I didn't turn up on this stage. And it's important to have a voice. As Stephen said at the start, you know, we've come a long way. You know, it's not the same as it was when I was a child, but we still have such a long way to go. And the terror of being an ally and turning up and just having a voice is super important to me. So that's what I'm hoping to do today. And every opportunity to take part in something like this is a massive opportunity to learn. So I'm here to do that as well. Brilliant.
Thank you, Terry. Well, let's get on with the questions then. The first one, and also I don't intend to kind of ask the question to everyone along the line, although the first question, I'm going to ask the question to everyone along the line. So what I'd like to start is, why is it important to celebrate Pride? Aren't we done? Aren't we there? Why is it important to celebrate Pride, Laura?
I definitely think we're not done. So I think, we have to, but we should celebrate how far we've came. And I think how you do that, it can be big, it can be small. But if you do that continuous recognition, then you'll keep moving forward, in my view. I think Pride itself and the visibility, it allows us to really continue to push the boundaries where, I think if we accepted where we were, to your point earlier, we'll go backwards. So for me, that's where it's importance really comes from. And because it creates a safe environment, and we in this room right now are really fortunate that our experience this evening is we do feel really safe. That might not be our everyday experience. And for some, that might be their only safe space. So I think for that reason, it's even more important.
Brilliant. I totally agree with your point about being seen. Brian, what about you?
I would say Pride's important because I think it's important to remember where we've been and also think about where we're going as well. I think Pride is a celebration of the rights that we have won since the 70s and 60s and such like. But I think it is an opportunity, as Laura said, just to kind of celebrate who we are and to make sure that everybody knows who we are as well. We're not going anywhere, so here we are.
I probably shouldn't say it. This isn't being recorded, though, so I can say it. At some point, hypothetically, I might want to get married to my partner. Don't tell her, though. However, right now, I can only do that if I pretend to be a man or a woman. I'm a non-binary person, so both of those things are a lie. And I'm not good at lying. It makes me stressed, and I don't want to be more stressed on my wedding day than I need to be. So the reason that I still talk about this stuff is because certainly from my perspective as an NB, we've got a lot to do. There's still lots of progress to make. I think we are, as a society, very, very passionate about labels. And I understand that. Labels make us feel safe, nice sort of boundaries in which we can exist. But the truth is that we are so much more complicated than that. Time and space is a factor in our identities as much as anything else. So for me, I want to keep fighting because when I see our community still fighting for simple, basic rights like marriage, that makes me feel sad because not everybody wants to get married, of course, but it's nice to have the option to do so. And certainly the community in which I spend a lot of time, which is the trans and non-binary community, we still face levels of discrimination which, quite frankly, suck. There are other words I can use, but I'm not going to. And quite honestly as well, being a slightly older millennial, I feel like it's my duty to do for Gen Z what X's and boomers did for me, which is stand up, be visible, and do a bit of fighting. Not physical, I'm not a fighter. But just be a role model, whatever that means. I wouldn't say I'm a role model, but certainly try and be what I want for those people who perhaps are worried that they're never going to get the equality. I grew up under Section 28. So I knew from a very young age that I was wrong and broken. I'm not, by the way. And so all I want is for this to never, ever, ever happen to anyone else ever again. I never, ever want a young person to think because of legislation, because of the law, that they are in some way broken or insufficient, because you're not. You are perfect and precious and beautiful. I'm monologuing.
It was great to listen to, though. Are we there yet? No, we're not. Equality is a really big word, and we simply don't have it for the LGBT community yet. As a technologist, it was less than 70 years ago that the reason I have a career died by suicide, chemical castration, because he wasn't allowed to be himself, Alan Turing. It was just over 50 years ago that there were riots because people could not be themselves in Stonewall. We have such a long way to go still, and yes, we've come huge leaps since then, but in real terms, we still see, and Pride Month is incredible joy, as Ali said. You know, I look over at the flag and I see exactly the same thing, but I also see the vitriol on Twitter. I see the complete divisive nature of where we exist in politics, and it's very, very difficult still to be part of the LGBT community. So we still have so much further to go.
Thank you for that. I'm going to add that it's the one time of year I get to dance with my partner, and I'm not allowed to judge him. He does tend to do the kind of box shuffle in the corner, and I adore it once a year. So moving on to our next question then, I'm going to go on to you, Brian, because kids grow up looking to their parents, looking to their family, and not seeing themselves. LGBT kids, particularly if they're growing up in a nuclear family of a mum and a dad who identify as cisgendered. Brothers and sisters, more often than not, also going to be treated cisgendered. They grow up in a world where they look and say, where am I? What was that experience like for you? What sort of role models did you have as an LGBTQ youth? And were they visible, were they accessible, and what would you hope to have had?
Well, I would say to that basically no, there weren't any. I grew up in the 80s, and I was born in 1977, and that period, there weren't any real LGBTQ role models at all. Certainly not in my local community, and I certainly wouldn't say on like TV, media, etc. I think the only representations that you really saw on TV and movies were almost like caricatures of what it was like to be a gay person, and they always kind of give the impression as that, oh, if you're gay, you must be flamboyant, you must be this, that, the other. I mean, there's certain people like Kenny Everett and John Inman, for example, fantastic comedians, but at the same time, you know, it kind of gives the wrong impression, and it fed into society at that time that all gay people were kind of flamboyant, and that's the way that everybody who was gay kind of behaved, when it's the complete opposite. So I would say for me, you know, there weren't any real kind of role models, I would say. It was very much a case of trying to figure that out yourself. My family is very supportive when I eventually did come out, but I would say that, you know, when everything in society is telling you that what you are is wrong, then it's very difficult to come to terms with that and try to explain that to your parents even. And personally, in my own personal experience, it got to a point where I attempted to take my own life because I just couldn't deal with the trauma of that situation, not being able to be yourself. But when I eventually did come out, you know, everything was fine. It was just, you know, it was just me in my head, just going places in my head, and family was absolutely fantastic. I did lose some family along the way, and you know, some friends, but that's their problem, not mine. So yeah.
Thank you for sharing that, and we're very happy you're here. What about you, Laura? Growing up, did you see yourself? What was it like being an LGBT youth, and what do you hope that the kids today have that you didn't?
Yes, not really too dissimilar. I think very much lack of role models. I'm 83, so a little bit later than you, but
yeah, I was going to say what?
Right answer. Just a call out. But I mean, my family, and again, incredibly supportive for any of them if they are watching. Incredibly Catholic, you know, full Catholic upbringing, school, church every week with school. And yeah, I mean, I would kind of probably call them modern Catholic. I certainly don't think there's, you know, there was too much of the religious indoctrination or too much heavy on the traditional, but just it wasn't talked about. And I think yeah, if I went and asked my mum now, and I would say, okay, so how old was I when you really thought, oh, you know, maybe she's a little different, and that's the word that I still think they would probably use. You know, I know she'd say like 7 or 8. Oh, I knew when you were really, really little.
You hear that a lot.
You hear that a lot, but you never had the dialogue about that. You know, you've kind of got to come to that yourself. And I think same with school. I mean, I've got this like really vivid memory of being in a class of like 30 kids, probably about 11, in like an RE class, religious education class. And I remember the teacher saying, who thinks they're going to get married? And the whole class except me, the hand went up. And I remember sitting, looking around thinking, what, everyone thinks they're going to get married? Well, and in my head, I'm not even sure I consciously knowing what that meant for me. I was thinking, but you can't get married? I can't get married. You know, and actually I think it was probably this event that's probably like brought some of those memories back, because you're not like consciously thinking about it. And I think all I would want now, I've got nieces, nephews, cousins. I mean, when I say Catholic family, it's like huge. I mean, it's huge. And all I would want is for them to just say, me and Emma as a couple that really loves each other, who have a great life, who have a great family, because we do, and a really accepting family. So to a lot of your points, you know, when it actually does come out, they're really happy because you're happy. In my experience, that has been my experience. And actually, I think we're doing okay with that. I've got some pretty advocacy positive nieces who will call out everything that they are not happy about if they see any discrimination, and they've done that from when they were very little, and that's always because they will always reference, well, my aunties are gay, and that's just a line, right? That's just a pride line.
I've got
I love
nephews who are in there like Flynn if they even think that somebody's having a go at my trainers. So thinking about that though, then, you know, there's that adage, if you can see it, you can be it. And obviously, more often than not, of our generation, we couldn't see it, so being it was extra hard. Ally, would you be okay sharing a little bit of what it was like when you came out?
Well, I loved it so much that I did it twice. So when I knew that there was something up probably when I was about 7 or 8 years old, and I pinned it down to, at the time, a developing awareness of my sexual attraction. And there were a few more answers to that question around me. When you talk about language, the language I had access to meant that I could start to describe my experience. And I remember my mum's best friend saying that my mum was wearing lesbian shoes once. And I thought, maybe I'm wearing lesbian shoes. So I immediately used the word, they are great shoes, you know. So I knew the word lesbian. So I thought, well, that kind of reflects a little bit of what I'm experiencing, the fact that I've kind of got this crush on my teacher and things like that. But for a long time, I sort of called myself a lesbian, but for a long time, again, because of role models, I thought all lesbians were either Victorian or in prison, which they're not, apparently. You get them in modern life as well, and outside of prison. That's a little call out for Bad Girls and Tipping the Velvet for anyone who's interested. Highly watchable programming. Anyway, as I went on, I came out formally when I was 16. I'd met someone and we'd become partners, and you know, this was 2005, 2006, pre-Equalities Act stuff. So there was all sorts of weird discrimination. Like I remember going to a campsite and being turned away because they didn't allow single-sex groups on the campsite. And I remember the woman saying to me, that's always quite a sexist policy. I was like, it's not sexist, it's just homophobic. Get you what it is right. But in terms of role models, I was drawn to, to say that there weren't any trans people is wrong. Say there weren't any non-binary people is wrong, but certainly they weren't as visible and accessible when I was growing up. So the people I was drawn to were the people who were toying with gender. So for me, someone like Eddie Izzard, adored her, absolutely adored her. Clever comedy, playing with gender, loved it. Annie Lennox as well. I mean, my mum really panicked about me for a while because I just listened to Annie Lennox on repeat for ages. And mum was like, what is... Anyway, it all came out in the wash, obviously. But today we are, I think, you know, lucky that there are increasingly visible non-binary and trans role models. You know, I was just mentioning to two people in the audience earlier, I was feeling a bit, I think after a month of celebrations, and I'm talking lots about how happy and how wonderful all of this is, you do have those moments of, this is a lot, this is traumatic still. And I was feeling a bit low, and I watched an interview with Elliot Page on YouTube, and it was like I was being plugged back in to the system. I felt so re-energized watching him speak about coming into himself, being who he is. And you can just see he's just embodying himself differently. And I was like, that's the reason. Because I want, you know, I want everyone to be able to access themselves like Elliot Page is currently accessing himself. Like, he looks amazing, he sounds amazing, he is doing work that he is super proud of. That's surely where we want to be. So, yeah, role models, visibility, anyone who's played with gender, specifically as well, the Red Power Ranger.
Terry, would you mind sharing, because your story is a little different than the rest of us here on the panel, would you share a little bit about what coming out means to you?
Yeah, sure. I think before I dig into that, I think there was a Stonewall event I attended a few years ago, and there was something said during that really shocked me, which is coming out is not a one-time deal. And I just hadn't thought about it, but changing jobs, new friends, there are so many situations where this experience has to be relived. Of course, the first time is different, but it just really resonated me, the importance of what I was trying to do. But excuse me, certainly for my part of this, I chatted to my eldest Braden today to talk about, you know, what I was doing, and he encouraged me to be here. But he also, when I said, what if they ask the question, he encouraged me to talk about this. So yeah, Braden came out as transgender when he was 14, and as parents, it was a very odd time. You didn't have the tools. You didn't have any of the, as Ali was just saying, any of the language to really deal with this. And I felt I was an ally at the time. I think I was possibly wearing it as a badge more than a verb. And he struggled. Goodness, he struggled for a lot of years. You know, that identity conversation, the recognition in himself, it was a very difficult time. As parents, all you ever want is for your kids to feel loved, of course, and accepted, and we did our best to do that. We made a lot of mistakes. You know, there's a surprising amount of muscle memory in pronouns, for example, and changing those. And so we apologized a lot. We probably cried a little bit more because we were getting it wrong, but he was brilliant, and he encourages me now every day to turn up and do this stuff. This stuff terrifies me. I feel like such an imposter, but Braden just gives me enough courage to come out and do this because it's so important. We see the challenges of transgender even today, and it seems to be getting worse. So everything I can do to try and help, and his story is a really powerful one.
Well, Brandon sounds extraordinary and very fortunate. Of course.
Actually, I got so excited about my role models, but also the second time I came out was about 8 years ago now. So I came out as non-binary in around 2015, although it was a slow process. And I kind of, again, having come out as a lesbian when I was 16, to come out as non-binary was interesting, because what it meant was that I kind of didn't want to do it all over again. So I did a TEDx talk and came out in that, which is by far the best way to do it, by the way. If you want like a blanket reach where there's no question, like for anyone who's come out as anything, you know, the repetition is the bit that really is hard. So actually sending out a memo is a really useful way of doing it. So yeah, like I said, I mean, sorry, I deviated onto Eddie Izzard and Annie Lennox, but yeah, that's twice. I don't want to do it again, preferably, but who knows?
And there's not a third part to this story, it's just in two parts you like to... Yeah. Okay, excellent. So whilst we're on the theme of remember, because we're remembering what it was like when we were young, we've talked about what it was like to make that transition to come into ourselves. What is the most important progress that has been made when it comes to LGBT rights in the last, I don't know, even 30 years for you?
For me, I think marriage. So that's been my personal experience. So, and true marriage, gay marriage for me. So when Emma and I, decided that we were going to take that step, we got civilly partnered. We had the ceremony, but it didn't feel the same. It really didn't. And actually, 2 years later, on that same anniversary, we work at the same place. So we took a half day and we kind of went and converted that civil partnership to true marriage when we could. And that was like, equally as special as that whole day, expensive, with all of our family, which was just us, which said, yeah, this is part of our journey and our story. So, we kind of done the big thing and then the important, the little thing just for us. So that's been a big step for me in a personal sense. I think in a employment sense, I think probably the development really of more women in leadership, has been again, there's a way to go. But I think there's been a big shift in years in terms of gender rights and the way employers support you through that. So 2 lenses, really.
I agree with that. I'm wearing the actual protest shirt that I wore when we finally got it. Terry, what about you? What's the biggest step forward you think we've made on LGBT rights in the last 25, 30 years?
That's a really difficult one. I mean, I would probably go further back, because there are a few really, aren't there? I mean, the legalizing of homosexuality, the difference in experience prior to that, and that was, goodness, 60-something years ago now, possibly 70. Repeal of Section 28, that was a really big deal.
It blows my mind that that was in 2003.
Exactly.
I mean, I thought it was gone, but I'm Australian, by the way. I thought it was gone before I got to this country, and I was horrified to find that abhorrent piece of legislation was still there.
Yeah.
So, I agree totally with that one.
I can imagine talking to somebody who hadn't lived through that, and just the concept that Section 28 existed, let alone, I mean, the repeal is obviously natural, but the fact that it existed in the first place. Gender Recognition Act was really important as well, of course. And I think there are some really important ones around workplaces now, the gender discrimination rules and laws, but sometimes I wonder if they're tick boxes as opposed to actual fundamental change in policy, fundamental change in behaviour. Yeah.
Cool. Well, we've kind of been remembering. Let's think about resilience. We have won some rights. Well, we've got some rights. They're under threat. And it's not, I fundamentally believe that civil liberties, whether they're LGBTQ civil liberties or those that extend to other discriminated groups, you just have to look at the horror show that is the Supreme Court in the United States right now and the potential of what could happen to Roe versus Wade, the news out today that you can carry a concealed weapon in New York if you'd like to. I believe all boats rise on a rising tide, and we're seeing the tide try to be suppressed here. So thinking a little bit about the rights that we have, where are the areas that we need to look to ensure that we don't go backwards? Yeah.
I have strong feelings about a lot of things. I have strong feelings that we are risking the potential resurgence of Section 28-like legislation. I think we're beginning to see the ripple of that in the UK, certainly. And I'll talk about the UK because it's what I'm most familiar about, but oftentimes this is echoed in other countries as well. But what we are seeing is an increasingly toxic and hostile environment for trans and non-binary people. And if you whip up enough toxicity and enough hostility, then eventually it becomes much easier to pass legislation which enshrines in law the fact that the existence of these people is in some way a threat. I'm not a threat. I mean, on the dance floor, sometimes. But I think this is why I do my work, because, I mean, I am one of a huge number of trans and non-binary people on the planet, and most of them are much more interesting than me. I have one story, one perspective, and you know, we need to elevate the voices of those people who are even more underrepresented, people of colour, people with disabilities, neurodivergent people. Yes, we need to hear their stories, not just because they're interesting, but because it's much harder to demonise an entire category of people if you've looked them in the eye, if you've had a chat with them, if you've had a coffee with them, if you've worked with them. So the work that you're doing here is so important, because what it's doing, it's getting everyone to look at each other in the eye and say, you're just another human being trying to do the thing that human beings do. So for me, the activism that has to take place in order to avoid the resurgence of these types of legislation is for whoever feels able to do so, because it's not for everyone, because it is taxing, is to stand up and be accountable. For all of us slightly more mature queer folk, I feel it's my responsibility to challenge my peers as much as possible. And my existence is provocative, particularly having identified as a lesbian in the past. That was an act of provocation, because I think for a lot of people that feels like almost a betrayal of the lesbian identity. I am so sentimental about lesbianism as a cultural force, as an identity. I have a lot of love and care for that community. Me being non-binary doesn't take away any of that. I have so much love, but we have to stop dehumanizing groups of people. We know how that we know how that ends. And honestly, I am horrendously biased. But the trans and non-binary people I know are some of the funniest, coolest people in the planet, and they are the people who really want the best for each other. So please, let's not demonize them. Let's treat everyone like they're actual human beings with actual sense of humours. So that's my point. Thank you.
How about you, Brian? Do you want to come in on that one?
Yeah, sure. I think my point of view, just to Ali's point, is that I think the key point there is communication. Hatred is allowed to grow in societies when people, you know, stop talking to each other and don't look each other in the eye. And, you know, we've seen that in the past, not just with LGBTQ, but also with other minorities. It always seems to be in times of, you know, social upheaval or massive change that if, you know, you can kind of demonize a particular group of people, then, you know, somehow you're going to solve all of society's problems. But in actual fact, it just makes everything worse. LGBTQ people, other minorities, they're all part of the fabric of society, and we all are equal, and we all contribute to that society. And I think the only way to kind of deal with that is activism, is to kind of stand up and you know, shout out for your rights and stand up and be counted. You know, it's not for everyone, I granted, but at the same time, I think, you know, it's quite easy to be kind of apathetic to that and just think, oh, well, somebody else will do it. And if nobody else stands up, then all these rights that we have gained could just equally just kind of slip away. And, you know, I think it would be a disservice to everybody who has been in the past who fought for rights just to let that slip away as well. I think we owe it to them, and we owe it to the future as well, our future generations, to be able to have a life perhaps even better than ours, with even more rights. I think we owe it to them as well. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think you've both picked up on, you know, what we're seeing is the politics of division. I have a theory, we're all in a minority of one. And if we could all just remember that, then we're all in the same community to begin with. Yes, some of us have something more in common with some other people. We're all a minority of one, and that's what we have in common. Terry, you want to come in on that?
I guess, yeah, just to add to Ali's point, because I think it's the thing as a parent, of course, I panic most about is the division of opinion on trans and non-binary. I think there's a societal thing here, and you've covered it really well there, Stephen. You know, we've become either or. It's not, you know, you're either a TERF or you're a TRA. You know, there's battle. We've chosen sides, and I was watching something around trans and identity recently, and a particular speaker who wouldn't use the pronouns in his university, and a conversation with him and Stephen Fry. And I think everybody should be more Stephen Fry. He recognized he was fundamentally opposed to his views, but he engaged, he had a conversation. He recognized at the end that they weren't necessarily going to agree on many things, but he had a rational conversation. And I think we avoid that now. You know, with social media, with other platforms, it's very easy to 280 character somebody into silence, and it's very easy to be divisive, and it's much, much harder to empathetically engage. Yeah, so I think there needs to be more debate, for sure.
I'm going to be honest, it annoys the hell out of me sometimes about how much into another person's opposition to me I have to be. And then I realize if I can't go there, I can't possibly make them change. So a point well made, I think. So still in the resist, what we're seeing, obviously, around the world, whether it's women's rights in the US, whether it's the watering down of the protections around conversion therapy, you know, torture, let's call it what it is, here in the UK, whether we're seeing statistics around crime against LGBT people on the rise and prosecution rates falling. What do we need to be doing to preserve these rights and freedoms? And what are the actions that we can take? What are the things that we can do? Yes.
Yeah. I love at this point. I'm really enjoying. No, I love it. I really like. It's just really cool. You know. I know you're a cool person.
Nobody has ever called me that.
So cool. Yeah. Good question. I think there is lots to be done structurally, and I think one thing that's really important that we remember is that the LGBTQ community haven't necessarily always had a smooth experience with some of the organisations that have been set up to protect us as a society. It's not always been easy for us to access the police. It's not always been easy for us to access medical care. So sometimes we have to act with a little bit of trepidation around those things. So I think that we just need the context of that. It's not as easy for us to ask for help as it is for other members of the community. So I think that can slow things down. So for me, it's really important, and I'm really passionate about working with these organisations, whatever organisations they are, to try and build community links. So I think that's really important, that any official organisation that's in charge of looking after people should build bridges with communities that are a little bit cautious about engaging with them. So I think that, again, is for people who have the capacity to do so, is build bridges where appropriate if you can do that. I think also we need to think about how we stand up for each other, and this is where allies come into their own, because we cannot do this stuff on our own. There is so much stress that comes with being part of a minority. I mean, minority stress. There's also this element of stereotype threat, which I think is something that we really need to recognise as well. For anyone who doesn't know, stereotype threat is basically that horrendous feeling you feel as a minority when you're in a room and you're desperately trying not to reinforce a negative stereotype about your group. So, for example, if I'm in a room full of cis straight people and they get my pronoun wrong, I will do a little safety check, but if it's not safe for me to do so, I won't say anything, because the last thing I want to do is reinforce the negative stereotype that all non-binary people do is talk about gender. So I'll just stay silent. So I think that there's lots of complexity to this, but ultimately it's about connecting with communities, and this is for the organisations in charge to do, but also for us to think about why diversity matters, why we need to create environments where people feel safe to speak up. Because if people don't feel safe to speak up, they won't. They will. We are very good, and the LGBT community historically have been very good at assimilating, because we've had to survive. So if we're using that skill today, then there's something up, and we can't get things like reporting up and hate crime down unless people are comfortable reporting and speaking up. And I think this is really, it translates into organisational stuff as well, because I think disclosure is one of the greatest measures of an inclusive culture. If people feel willing to disclose who they are, tell you as the boss who they are, that is a sign of cultural health. If people are pretending to be something they're not, then that might be a sign that there's something up. So I think there's a complex set of things at play, but that would be how I would approach it at this point.
And thinking about workspace, because you've both talked about your work environments to a degree, what are the sorts of things that, you know, I happen to be a gay man, I happen to be in a position of influence in my own organization, but what are the things that you think of in the places where you work that leaders should be thinking about and doing that make that the safe space that Ally's talking about?
I would say, you know, just giving that space, I would say, and, you know, just allowing people to be who they are. And, you know, because, in a work environment, I think you get the best out of someone if, you know, if they can just be their authentic selves. And if they're comfortable and they don't have to worry about, you know, or am I going to be found out, or, you know, or whatever, then, you know, they can concentrate on the work that they need to do. So I think it's just about creating that safe space and allowing people just to be themselves, really. Yeah.
Lauren, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely echo the point. I think for me, what I try and do is, I guess, think about what inclusivity really means to me when I'm in work, mm-hmm. And I guess I would kind of categorize it around, you know, operating within your boundaries, not the organisation's boundaries, you know, and just trying to really apply that mentality to whoever I'm then engaging with. So, I mean, I've been interviewing this week for, you know, just some new hires. We're all doing it, right? It's a busy market. And I always try and find a way to just drop in something about me. I'll always reference what I've done at the weekend with my wife, or just something, just create a language that means that actually whatever that other individual wants to share is safe, is absolutely safe to do so. But absolutely, if they don't want to share, that's fine, because that's their boundary. Mm-hmm. They don't need to work in any way outside of what they're comfortable with. And I think for me, as a leader, we do have a responsibility to operate like that. I think we're there to support the culture of that organisation. We should challenge it as well. So if there's policy or things around the environment that you're not comfortable with, is making sure that you do have that voice, particularly in a leadership role. I think you should try and do that, even if it's outside your comfort zone. You know, to
it's
just
kind of
be
like,
that voice.
You know, you as a leader have the right to say something about it. That's what you are expected to do. But I think as an LGBTQ person, we have the responsibility as well, because we can make change happen. I know you want to come on this one too, Terry.
Yeah, I guess there's 2 points to this. One, as a parent, and certainly reach out to your school, ask them what their LGBT education looks like, because there are some terrible examples out there and there are some really great examples. So as a parent, you can try to become more of an activist even in those younger years. But you asked what we can do at an organizational level. I've got a shopping list. So there is so much we can do. Of course, you know, employee resource groups like diversity and inclusion groups within organizations. If you're big enough, an LGBT group. Certainly when I worked at GSK, a large organization, the LGBT group had over 3,000 people in it, which is just phenomenal. Look at all of your policies as well. Have you got a maternity policy? Most organizations legally have that. Okay, what else are you doing? What else are you doing around adoption? What else are you doing around the other policies that are more inclusive? Look at pensions. Are they fair? Look at healthcare. I've certainly had private healthcare in a company where my son was excluded because you need a legal diagnosis in order to change your gender. And he has gender dysphoria because that is the legal diagnosis. That was excluded on private healthcare. So anything in relation to him being transgender was out. Thankfully, my current healthcare doesn't have that. Look at education as well. There are so many things we can do. This is a perfect example, but LGBT history isn't just a month. Pride isn't just a month. You know, there are events, and there are significant events throughout the year. So bring them in, celebrate them, make them part of the fabric of what you're doing. And then a great example, senior leaders. senior leaders have an overwhelmingly huge impact. So look for allies, look for ways that DEI and LGBT group recognition can be amplified in your organization. The shadow of the leader kind of concept is huge. So yeah, and I've got more, but I'll stop there.
Well, I want to pick up on allyship, because the last kind of area of the theme we're talking about tonight is rise up. And as you correctly said, Ali, we can't do this on our own. We need friends. We need people to help us. What does allyship mean to you as somebody who would proclaim they've been on a journey with this?
I guess when I first started referring to myself as an ally, I had no idea what it meant. I felt I understood, I felt I was supporting, I felt that, of course, I not only, the word tolerance comes into often a lot of these things, I was embracing of, I didn't really know at that time. Through learning, I love the phrase allyship as a verb. You know, what are you doing about this? What little thing can you do? And that can be as simple as putting your pronouns on a profile. But what are you doing to try and make inclusive environments for people? So yeah, allyship for me is very much I'm jumping back to childhood programs I watched. Allyship is a doing word, yes.
And I think I went through a similar process. I was heavily influenced by Feminista Jones, the queer black activist, who I think it was the Charleston massacre in about 2015, and she wrote very much about, she was very down on allyship, because she said, I don't need somebody who wants to commit to mutual support, because white straight people don't need my support, my people are dying. So she started to talk about co-conspirators, and I had this little switch in my head. I use ally, but these are people who are gonna get in the trench, who are gonna help me do the things on my terms, to my needs, to the community that's behind me, and not expect that I have to do something for them in return.
And I think this is a really important point, because like, if somebody shouts something a bit queer-phobic at me, at least I know it's happening, right? Like I can say no, or something equally intimidating. But what I don't know is happening is the stuff that's going on in those WhatsApp groups that we're all members of, or what's happening behind the scenes in decision-making rooms. I don't know if my CV has ever been sort of pushed into a bin, not because I wasn't qualified, but because there was something gay on it. And there was lots of gay stuff on my CV for a long time, because I ran networks, employee networks. And I was always in that double bind of, do I take the gay stuff off in order to have a better chance of not being judged, or do I leave it on because I wouldn't want to work for someone who wouldn't want me to work for them, being myself? So it's always that stuff. The allies that are supporting us when we're not looking, you're the really good ones. I guarantee it, you are the ones who are blessed. You can jump the queue at Pride, okay? Because we only know what's happening in front of our eyes. We don't know what's happening behind our backs. And I think that's, for me, really important for allies to remember.
How about you? Do you want to come in on allyship? What does it mean to you? What do you need?
What do we need? I think we just need somebody who can, fight for our corner, essentially. I think that's what we need. I mean, Terry's a great example. I think it's to Terry's point about it being something that you do, not just something that you say. It's not just a label. And it's people who actually believe in what we're trying to achieve and recognize that, rights, gay rights are human rights, essentially. It's no different to any other group. And yeah, I think that's what we need, just somebody who can, or people, or a group of people who can, appreciate that, what we're trying to achieve is just to have a life like anybody else. It just
100%. 100%. But look, I know we're kind of coming up to, I'm supposed to be looking out for, that signal that says we're coming up to when we're going to hand over for Q&A. We've got a few minutes, though, before that. I wanted to go down the panel and just ask, look, we've got a captive audience. Literally, you guys are captive. Those doors are now locked. We've got a captive audience online. I'm kidding, by the way. We've got a captive audience online. What one ask of them would you have in support of LGBTQ people today?
Don't be afraid to ask the questions. I think that's a a key one. Just don't be afraid. We will get it wrong. I'll get it wrong. They'll get it wrong. And that's absolutely fine. Don't take it too seriously. So just for me, it's about not leaving things in the unsaid. And that, I think, will take us a long way.
Yeah. Because then we know a conversation can be had. Absolutely. And it's safe to have it. What about you, Brian?
Just to reiterate my last point, I would just say, just recognize that we are just people, you know. There's nothing more complicated than that. So, yeah, just treat us like people.
Nice. Thank you.
I think everybody's got a superpower in their pocket. I mean, most people. And that superpower is empathy. I know, yeah. Empathy. If in doubt, tap into your own experiences. I often get people who do my workshops to think about this, but, you know, if you imagine a time where you felt truly included, like lots of people have examples, but, you know, like when you score the winning goal for your football team, or, I don't know, you go to a family get-together and all your aunts kiss you and tell you how handsome you are, or Sunday morning the kids and the dog and the cat are piling in and you feel like you truly belong. That's the feeling that I'm shooting for. That's the one I'm aiming for. And I want everybody to come into work every day with that feeling in them. Because if we think about the opposite of exclusion, when we felt like we don't belong, that is a completely different version of ourselves. And that is the version of ourselves that is not going to be coming into work and delivering their best, feeling like they want to be there. I want to tap into that feeling of genuinely feeling like you belong. So if you're ever worried about what that looks like, just put yourself in that place. Use empathy as a power to understand someone's experiences, even if you have no sort of granular understanding of their identity. At least you can tap into empathy to understand why it's important that you include them.
I think Laura covered the one that I was going to cover, which is don't be afraid. You know, as an ally, don't be afraid. You will get it wrong, but that's okay. You're trying to help. But I guess very quickly, some practical things. Public pronouns are really powerful. They create a safe space. They indicate that you are an ally. They indicate that you are safe to talk to, even if you don't have the language to talk back yet. And I guess try to become involved in either a DEI group in your local, you know, in your employer or in your local area. You don't have to turn up with any expertise. I had no idea when I first started doing this what I was doing. I still technically don't, but I turning up is the important part. Taking that step is the important part.
I agree. I agree with all of that. What I will say is, for somebody, I was asked the question only a couple of weeks ago, what does pride mean to me? And I had to think about it because nobody weirdly ever asked me that question before. And it's been a journey, because pride for me was protest when I started this. I didn't have fun at pride. We were fighting for our lives. And then there was the period of time when we started to win some of those fights and we could celebrate. But I looked at some of the parades and they were dykes on bikes or trucker daddies in assless chaps, and that didn't seem to connect with me as well. What party are we going to? So I found my space and my community, and for me those two things have come together. So I would ask every LGBTQ person to have fun during Pride, enjoy it, be in environments, kiss your partner, hold their hand, and don't be afraid, but also use that energy to redouble down for the fight, because we're not done yet. So on that point, I will come back and thank my panelists later. I think we've got some questions that have been coming through on Slido, and the lovely Claire is going to throw them to us.
Lovely Claire, loitering by the buffet where you can usually find me. So we've had lots of questions coming through. You have, I think, covered some of these already, and people have been upvoting. By far, the one that's been upvoted the most says, educating yourself is an important part of being an ally. However, some of these topics are personal and sensitive. When is it okay to ask, and when is it not?
Who would like to take that one? Well, I think Terry's been there, but...
Yeah, I guess I really struggled when I was first looking at being an ally, when I was first trying to understand what that meant. I think I would probably say it's generally never okay to ask, which sounds an odd thing to say, but what I found was that in trying to create a public face, and I share regularly on LinkedIn or Twitter, I talk about it at work, in one-to-ones with my team, I will talk about some of my own experiences. it creates a safe space. And what you're trying to do is create a safe space to have these conversations. Of course, learn as much as you possibly can, but typically, you know, these are very personal things. You wouldn't stand up and ask somebody if they were heterosexual. It's just not a conversation we have. So try to amplify as much a safe space as you possibly can, and people find you. I've had, thankfully, years of brilliant conversations just because of my public activity. So yeah, more of that.
Just back to the previous point I was making about, you know, just treat people as people. We are people after all, you know, and just having a conversation with someone, and if it, you know, in the course of that conversation, you can ask about their relationships and their family life and all that kind of stuff. And, you know, if it just happens to be that they're in a same-sex relationship, then so be it. I mean, it is just, you know, people with people. It's nothing any more complicated than that. So I think it's fine to ask at any time, really. It is just a conversation with someone.
Right, but I think for me, I mean, I get quite cross when I remember, this is many, many years ago, but somebody asked me, you know, who the wife was in my relationship. It was Andrew, but that's not true, Andrew, if you're watching. But it annoyed me that what this person was asking me to do was educate them. And my response to that was, that's not my responsibility, educate yourself. But relate to me as a human being, and I will share my experience with you, that thing you've taught yourself will come to life in a real human being. So I think it builds on what you're saying is, treat us like people, talk to us and build relationships with us, and in the context of that, if it is safe, we will share our experience with you, but it is up to you to educate yourself.
One that follows on very nicely from that, Steve. So another one here that we've got on Slido is, what's your advice on learning more and how can people educate themselves on these subjects?
I can certainly answer that because, you know, once again, I go back to Feminista Jones. She got very frustrated with what's it like being a black person being persecuted in America without anybody doing any research about how are black people persecuted in America. They put that all on her. We have a thing called the internet. It's quite wide-reaching these days, and you can ask it almost anything, and it will give you lots of answers. So I think there are huge amounts of resources. Stonewall, Terence Higgins, I mean, and these are just some of the organizations here in the UK. I don't think there's any barrier in finding information out, and I think the more important thing is feeling you have a personal responsibility to go and do that. If you want to be an ally, this is about mutual support. This is about you getting off your ass and doing something that helps us. So I think there are plenty of resources out there. I do think the thing that is important that you are able to come and talk to people like us, build relationships with us, and take that education and build our life experience into a real understanding of what that feels like for a human being to be living under Section 28, or not being able to get married to your partner, or being brought up in a very religious household where you were just not present. So I don't know if I've answered the question. I feel like I'm starting to rant. But I think there are plenty of resources for people to educate themselves, but bring that to life by sharing that experience and being open to our experience.
In a world where we can Google how to do origami with delivery boxes, I'm pretty sure we can find ways to be an ally. Yeah.
So again, there's one here that very much follows on to a topic that you've covered already, which is, you know, when is it okay to ask? And Terry, you said it's not okay to ask. But somebody's asked here, what do people get wrong in their words or behaviours when they're actually trying to help?
Yeah, so I think probably the best answer to that is to talk a little bit about unconscious bias. So we come I know that I'm speaking to the converted here. The hardware comes preloaded with loads of software. We don't want all the software. Sometimes we spend quite a lot of time trying to get rid of the software that we didn't want on there to begin with. And that's what unconscious bias brings, is that this default setting, this place that we come from, which comes with lots of assumptions about other people's experiences. So if I'm straight, I'm just going to assume that everybody else is straight. So of course, I'm going to ask you, who's the wife? Because my default setting is heteronormative. So we need to be aware of that, those unconscious biases, those implicit associations that are in us, because what they will do is drive specific types of questions. They will drive specific assumptions, and genuinely, it's not because we want to do harm. It's because we come from a specific viewpoint. So self-awareness is key. If you've ever been to therapy, first of all, well done. But also, we are taught to watch our processes, to observe, to be a witness. That is one of the best things we can do in order to unpick some of those habits that we have of assuming we know. Gender is the perfect example. We assume we know how to talk to someone based on our assumed gender. We know what things they might be interested in. We know how we can speak to them. We know what kind of subjects are safe to talk about. And we can do that automatically. We don't have to think about it very much. And that goes for pretty much every type of person. So self-awareness, I think, is the answer to that. And you know, as been mentioned, you will make mistakes, but just apologise and move on.
And I will say, I have actually been asked more recently, you know, who's the wife, or who doesn't work seems to be the language, which is just equally horrible. The way I now respond to that is not to be flippant and point at Andrew. It is to say, what do you know about gay relationships? What experiences have you had? What have you learned? Because it starts a conversation rather than it becoming me retreating to my defensive corner. And it really does allow them to start exploring in conversation with me what their biases are. What did they bring into that conversation that perhaps they just didn't mean to?
Oh, absolutely. And I genuinely don't think malice is the main cause of any of this. My experience is that most people are desperately trying to do their best, but the biggest issue facing most people is fear of getting it wrong, and fear of getting it wrong drives quite strange behaviours sometimes, avoidant, slightly defensive, as you said, and sometimes just wholly inappropriate.
Great stuff. I'm looking at the audience, so if anybody does have a question, please feel free to raise your hand. Otherwise, I will keep going because there's absolutely tons of these on Slido. The next one is quite a lovely one, I think, which is, what's the one piece of advice you wish you could go back and tell your younger self?
We have a winner.
You definitely will get married. Like, I wish I'd been in that RA class, like jumping around, like definitely gonna find her. Do you know what I mean? Just, it actually will be fine, you know. So to some of the experience that Brian shared, mine not the same, but the anxiety, that bit about repeated coming out, I hadn't really thought about that too much. Kind of be a bit prepared for that. But actually, you will find a version of yourself that you do love. And yeah, stick at it, I guess. And yeah, jump around RA class. Do they still have that?
Advice to myself would be just to be yourself and just feel free to be your authentic self and know that you will eventually marry the love of your life. And and just, you know, you're going to have to go through some hard times, but you will get over it, you'll get through it, and it's worth it, and it's worth it in the end. So yeah, just be yourself.
I feel like I want to hear everyone's answer to this question.
I think I'd say, oh, Ali, it's not the sexuality thing, it's the gender thing that doesn't feel right. Because I got so hung up on the sexuality. And I think that, you know, that disconnect I felt for so many years after I came out as a lesbian, I imagined that there'd be some kind of like sort of awakening and all of my fears and concerns would alleviate. It took me another 10 years to come to terms with that. Actually, it was all really to do with gender. It always had been, way before I'd really identified any kind of attraction. I'd always performed the expected role of girl really badly, and I'd internalised that. And I just would love to pick myself up and just give myself a little cuddle and say, it's all right, there'll be words for it one day.
I suspect younger me possibly wouldn't have listened to me, but I think kindness, practice kindness, and as Ali called out earlier, empathy. I think I didn't exhibit enough of that as a youngster, and I suspect most of us don't. And it reduces barriers everywhere. So yeah, kindness and empathy, I think, would be the things I would hope I could get through to the thick-headed version of me many years ago.
Weirdly, I'm going to say the same things. I was very intolerant of the people who were intolerant of me. And I think the biggest thing I've had in probably too long is actually what I want is to be people tolerant of me. For us to get there, I'm going to have to understand where they're starting from.
Perfect. Right. There's a good one here about people asking for tips on how to make a D&I group work effectively. Does anyone have any tips?
You need an executive sponsor. I don't know why I turned that into a song, but I have. That's how important it is. Get someone really, really important on your side, because whilst they may not have the capacity to be hands-on, having them supporting you, even if it's from afar, is critical, because, you know, in a complex organisation, there are so many demands on leadership, so many demands on resources. But if you've got someone who's in it with you, it will make the whole process much easier, whether that's getting an event organised, or getting some budget, or putting together a partnership with another organisation. All of those things become much smoother with a sponsor who's at the highest possible level. So it does take a little bit of guts, because I know that it's not always easy approaching senior leaders, but they're human beings, I've been told. And many of them are just looking for an opportunity to use their leadership skills in a way that really brings great joy and growth for their people. So there are leaders out there who are desperate to get involved. They just might not necessarily know how. And if you give them a solution to that problem, all is good.
I would just add, don't make them exclusive. Make them as inclusive as possible. I've worked in a number of organizations that had the gay and lesbian group over there, and the trans group over there, and the race group over there, and the neurodiverse group over there. And I guess it comes back to my genuine belief we're all a minority of one. Intersectionality, I think, is a great power for us rather than something that we should start be subdividing by. So my observation is of those networks I've been a part of, the ones that were healthiest, were most effective and made real differences in their organizations, that one that were embraced a conversation about how are we all the same by being just a little bit different.
Okay, great. We've got one here that is, do you have any advice for someone struggling with exploring their identity and sexuality?
Funnily enough. It's different these days. I think, you know, as been mentioned by some of the other panellists, like we have at our disposal a huge amount of information and support, and stuff that wasn't really in existence when I was exploring my sexuality and identity. And that's probably why it took 2 decades for me to really land on an identity that made most sense. But I think, you know, we are now able to connect with people who are like us. When I go into schools, I see networks of LGBT students, which still blows my mind, because, like I said, I grew up under Section 28. I still get the shivers down my spine when I walk into a school, because I'm like, oh gosh, am I too queer? And it's all just a hangover from that. You know, it is a hangover from that. It's nothing more, but it is internalized. There's this you know, constant battle that you have with your previous experiences. If you are exploring your identity, find people who understand and can listen. There are some brilliant charities out there. Gendered Intelligence in London, all sorts in Brighton. Those are my main areas. I'm sure there are people in this room and on this call who probably have great organisations in your local area that can help. Maybe it's something that you can put on your intranet, like a list of resources or signposts to local charities and organisations that can help you explore. And don't be afraid of change. I think you don't need to land on something straight away. I think that we're all very desperate to find ourselves very quickly, but the only thing I've really come to terms with is that it's a lifelong journey, and that when you think you've got it sorted, you absolutely haven't. So take your time, and don't be worried that your identity shifts or changes over time. In fact, I think that's beautiful. I think that's the glory of being part of this community, is that we can flex and we can change, and that's great.
And I will say, you know, probably in my early 20s, I had the straightest experience that I've ever had in my life, which is I was very certain of my gender and I was very certain of my sexuality, and I didn't want to hear about anyone who was having a question about that. I was right on for my people. As an LGBTQ person, I have learnt that actually it is a spectrum, it is a journey, it takes time, it does evolve, and I've learnt to be much more open, so people know they can come talk to me. So I think, I don't know what it's like to have to explain. I am very certain in those things about myself, but what I've learnt is to create an environment where people who aren't as certain as me about that part of their life, that it's okay to have a chat with me about it, because I genuinely have an open mind.
Isn't that beautiful? That ability not just to have to come ready-baked with an identity, to be able to come to someone like you and say, maybe, or how about? And that be something, that a space that you can hold. I think we like certainty. If you can hold ambiguity, I mean, I think that's incredible. It gives us so much more opportunity to be our true selves rather than a kind of version.
I'm conscious of time. Do we have one more killer question?
Yeah, we are just about out of time. So just to say to everybody, a quick thank you from me, and also to say that we will be sharing the recording of this. So yeah, thank you to everybody who has watched the live stream. I hope that you've enjoyed it as much as those of us in the room and had your own splendid buffet to tuck into as this has gone along. I'm going to end on one question, and that's about privilege. This one says the word privilege is used routinely in the LGBT plus space, and indeed in other spaces of diversity and inclusion. What does privilege mean to you?
Should we quickly go along the line, what that word means to each of us? Terry?
So I've done a lot of reading on this. There's some fantastic reading. There's an article from Peggy McIntosh called Unlocking the Invisible Knapsack, and it's around white privilege. But I was reading another article the other day which just was brilliant. So it's got the acronym WHAM, and I was channeling my inner George Michael. So I'm white, heterosexual, able-bodied male, and I literally tick all of the boxes. So I'm more likely to have a job, I'm more likely to be higher paid, I'm more likely to accelerate in organizations. That's privilege. And ultimately, because of those things, somebody else without all of those boxes ticked is likely to struggle, likely to have far less opportunity than me. Doing something with the boxes that I've ticked is really, really important.
Yeah, I think that's a really good explanation. I think, you know, privilege is been tarnished as a word that's sort of provocative and a bit, you know, unfavourable. But I think what it is, it really is just an example of the things that you don't need to overcome in order to get to where you want to be. I mean, I'll give a personal story, a really short one. So for various reasons, when I was about 16, I had to go and get a job. And I was 16, I hadn't even done my GCSEs, I don't think. I didn't have much going for me, really, to be honest with you. Like, I don't know who's going to employ me, but I walked into a shopping centre and I handed my CV, which was basically a blank page, to a shop that was opening. And they called me in and interviewed me, and I got the job. And I do wonder, and I have always wondered, how much of my privilege came into play in that situation. And that job was necessary for me to get out and navigate a really difficult personal situation. But I was white. I was able-bodied, as you say. I was, you know, I was educated to a certain level. It enabled me to get out of a really difficult situation. If I hadn't been afforded those privileges, if I wasn't living in a society that preferenced those things over and above other identities, my life could have been derailed in a moment. And my life could have looked exceptionally different to what it does. And I think in that moment, that's where privilege hits the ground. That's where it really comes into play. It's not about being better or more hardworking. It's not really a judgment call on your tenacity, but it is, what is it that you're being given? What obstacles are you not facing in order to navigate difficult situations? So, yeah, that plays on my mind a lot. I think it's a really interesting question.
Yeah, I agree with all of those points. For me, one interesting point, I think, is that even within the gay community itself, within LGBTQ community, you know, we've got a lot of rights now, but there is still this sense that, you know, like pride events, I think you touched on it before, like pride events are primarily targeted towards like white males, and if you as a black person in the gay community, you have to deal with racism, and you have to deal with racism within the gay community itself, then that's you are not privileged at all. If you have to deal with anything that is other than, then you're not privileged, essentially. So I mean, it exists in wider society, but it also exists within the gay community, sadly. Essentially, it has been, and it has been for a long time, kind of geared towards, like white male privilege, even within the gay community, even from the just after the Stonewall riots and stuff like that. The trans rights just weren't considered to be as important as anybody else's rights, even within the gay community itself. So, that's what it means for me.
Again, also agree with all your points. I think for me, I always think of it as that ability to not have to think twice or think for the third time about what's the right thing to do here, what can I do in this situation versus what I feel uncomfortable doing in this situation. So simple things for me around kind of that safety aspect, right? So do you feel safe in an environment to put your hand back and grab your partner or turn around and give them a little kiss without that fear of you're going to get some sort of abuse, physical, verbal, and trying to be really conscious of the things that I do and don't think twice about, and versus the situations in which I know I think 3 or 4 times about and then don't take the action because you don't feel safe. And just trying to be really conscious of that for me, I think is a key part of it, and recognising. I try and recognise where others might also feel in that situation. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. I mean, I'm wham too. The H is the H was always silent. So I'm wham without the H. So when I think of privilege, what I think of is obligation. Because to your point, I am white, I am able-bodied, I am male. The thing that I know to be different about me, unless I declare it sometimes, it's not really on show. Well, so I feel that puts on me an obligation to be aware of when I am the most comfortable, when the things I do, no one will question. And I have a job that lets me do certain things as well. I have to be very conscious to go out of my way and say, Steve, there is an obligation on you to recognize when others don't get what you've got. So on that note, I just want to say a massive thank you to all of you. You've been incredibly honest. I've learned so much tonight in just hearing your stories. Thank you for giving up your time and being with us. Thank you everyone who's joined us on the live stream, and thanks to everybody in the room who's been as well. Give it up for these guys. They've been truly amazing. And I have no doubt we will see you again next year. Thanks, everyone.